So I'm Alison Klayman. I directed and produced and also shot and co-edited the documentary Ai Weiwei Never Sorry. I lived in China for 4 years and it was my first sort of life and job after I left university. I was really interested in doing journalism and documentary film and having adventures, so I went to China and on a trip, and I ended up staying there for all that time. And meeting Ai Weiwei was a really fortunate and life-changing experience for me, and it led to me making this, which is my first film. So I met him about halfway through my time in China. I'd already been living in China for 2 years, and by then I was just getting a good hang of the language. I had had a lot of different jobs, honestly really met a lot of different kinds of people in China. So that meant that by the time I did meet Ai Weiwei, because I didn't go to China looking for him, but when I did meet Ai Weiwei, I was really able to kind of place him within the context that I had become familiar with in China and say, wow, this is a really special guy. His earthquake project was underway when I first met him. The Sichuan earthquake was May 2008, and I met him in December. There was like one brief moment where he thought, hey, it'd be cool, maybe you want to go out there and join the volunteers, or, you know, and be filming to collect the names of the children who died in the earthquake. And I think in that same thought, he sort of really was like, or never mind, basically because his, you know, volunteers and the people from the blog who were taking this upon themselves, they were running into trouble with authorities every day. And so I think he thought, actually, maybe it's not good that you'll kind of stick out as a foreigner. So, you know, he didn't want to draw more attention to them. It's a good question. So, I mean, Ai Weiwei is like, you know, a publicity machine, just kind of on his own. And it's something that I observed. It's both because of the activities he does, the way he promotes himself, and also the way that he touches on so many different, I think, areas of interest internationally. Probably the biggest of which China, but also art, human rights, you know, social media. So I really felt like with him, you know, I got the best PR training you could possibly get by being around him for so long. So I think, you know, a lot of people still don't know who Ai Weiwei is, and that's still, you know, a big challenge. But once you do, you realize how much kind of coverage he does get as an individual. Of course, the fact that he was detained in April 2011 also contributed to his story being elevated, sort of the urgency, the international attention, and the fact that there was this movie that had already been in production for several years kind of meant that our production did get a lot of attention as well. That comes from a couple reasons. I think, first of all, his English is really good, and that's kind of, you know, kind of a boring reason, but it's really part, you know, it's really part of it because he can communicate so well, and you know, he also spent a lot of time living outside of China in New York. He spent about a decade living there, and was, you know, and that itself doesn't, you know, mean as much, but he immersed himself in the culture, in international contemporary art. And as an artist, he's also continued to travel the world, Germany, UK, so many different places. I also think that he, again, he just has this charisma. He has this really powerful skill for communicating, and he employs humor a lot of the time. And I think that's a really big part of his appeal, not just internationally, but also domestically. Yeah, I definitely felt like if the movie wasn't funny, it wasn't a good movie about Ai Weiwei. Full stop. You know, it doesn't matter even if it wasn't my movie. Anything that's about Ai Weiwei that doesn't have a little bit of cheekiness, a little bit of a, you know, sense of humor, it's just not a good reflection of him as a person, because it is, I would say, to be around him, again, things are sometimes deadly serious, and he's always got very important, big, timely issues on his mind, but, you know, he's also wants to have a good time, and he wants others around him to have a good time. So I did feel like I wanted the film to reflect that about him. There were certain tense moments of filming, primarily when we were actually outside of Beijing on trips in Sichuan province in Chengdu, when Ai Weiwei was going to directly confront authorities. He was directly going to the police stations and the courthouses and seeking out this kind of confrontation. And of course, those were times where there had to be a strategy, how we were going to film, where I was going to be, and all those things. But Ai Weiwei also often has a lot of people filming with him. You know, I was the only one who was there, maybe at certain moments who was there for my purpose, but there might be a journalist taking notes, there might be like an independent cameraman from another city in China who's a fan of Ai Weiwei's, there might be, you know, another documentary filmmaker, there's his own film crew. So, you know, there's also, it's usually like kind of a big scene, and that I kind of had to navigate. But what I would say is, you know, I really didn't run into any serious trouble, but that also I think has to do with the fact that I was already kind of someone who had been working in China as a reporter. I was filming, you know, for other stories, sensitive or not sensitive, and I kind of knew how things worked and how you will run into problems all the time. So in a way, being with Ai Weiwei I didn't think was any more touchy or didn't require anything different than the normal kind of way you had to understand your situation when you're going to be filming in China, whether you have a journalist visa or you don't have a journalist visa. You know, as a foreigner, you just have to know how to do it. Initially, I did a 20-minute video for you know, an exhibition of his, and it ran on a loop for a couple months with the show. But we'd covered so much material about politics, about this earthquake campaign, and again I felt like his personality itself really deserved attention and kind of examination. I also, you know, I was really interested in him, but I was also really curious, you know, how genuine is this guy? You know, his art really plays with fake and real as a theme. He's very media savvy, so like, who is he really? I feel like that was really my most driving question, and I was interested in that because I thought that by answering that question in a feature film, I felt like it was both going to do him justice, but it was also going to introduce audiences to China in a way they might not have thought of China before. I probably had, I had between 200 and 300 hours of footage. I think that was my own. But I don't think of that as the only amount of material that I had to deal with, because Ai Weiwei has his own documentaries, a few of which I got, you know, high resolution copies of from him so I could excerpt from that. There's some times when his camera people and I traded footage, and then of course there's a countless number of tweets of, you know, blog posts, photos, and also all of his New York photos, which were several thousand. So I really think it was a process of kind of narrowing it down. When it came to the story itself, I think first we kind of identified, you know, I basically wanted to rely as much as possible on the fact that it was shot as a verite documentary and what happened over the last few years. But as I was shooting, and I just always, you know, just tried to shoot everything, I felt like as I was shooting I was realizing how much I needed to give people context on his background, and through that maybe even, you know, kind of hit on certain highlights, whether it's like, you know, there has to be a cultural revolution like moment at Tiananmen Square, like moment, you know, moments that were important to kind of ground people also in the history, the relevant history of China to some extent. So I feel like my investigation kept getting wider and wider. When I started, I don't think I expected to be doing as many, you know, interviews with other people as I did, but I think it really strengthens, you know, it actually strengthens what you see with Ai Weiwei, because you kind of can put him in a context, and you can also believe like, hey, his peers or, you know, other people, this is how they see him, and so we're all on this one kind of path. Also working with my editor Jen Finneran in New York, which is where we edited the film, and we edited, you know, for a year. You know, it takes a long time, but it was really important for me to work with someone who was going to help me with story, and actually who didn't have a China background specifically, because I thought the most important thing was to make, you know, was that the film was going to engage people and they enjoy watching it for the period of time. I think, you know, Ai Weiwei's favorite topic to talk about, I think the entire time I was filming, so end of 2008 on, was always the power of the internet, the power of social media. But it wasn't my favorite topic, I think, for a while, because I think I just really took it for granted. I think it's something that's very easy to see as like, it's just an obvious part of our lives, even though, I mean, I did not grow up really with these things. I mean, Facebook came out, you know, when I was in college, you know. And you remember I was talking about this before the Arab Spring, before WikiLeaks. So then there also came to pass that there were a lot of, you know, big global events that reminded us, that really had to, I think, at least for me, you know, kind of shook me. I was like, no, this is a huge game changer in, you know, world history, and we are just at the beginning, and we don't know how it's going to affect things. So then that started to, the importance of it started to really crystallize for me, and I felt like then that becomes part of the message of the film. But I think it's still a question, I mean, because social media is a tool. It's not inherently good or bad, it's just how people use it. I'm working on a lot of different new things that are mostly in the documentary realm, but, you know, I think I'm always looking for strong characters, because that's been the biggest lesson of this film, which again just was by coincidence. I met Ai Weiwei and I thought he was worth following for this documentary, but after doing it I realized the more specific the story that you tell, actually I think the more universal it can become.